Right now I'd like to talk about the differences between a Polymesh 3D and a 3D mesh here inside ZBrush. They might sound very similar, but they're very, very different. Right now I'm working with a Polymesh 3D, which means I can simply sculpt on this and freely work with it. If I go into the tool pop-up here and select any of these 3D meshes that you see here, for instance this sphere 3D, and try to click and sculpt on it, I'm going to get a pop-up that says that I can't do that and I need to convert it to a poly mesh. So to do that, all you need to do is simply click here in the tool palette, make Polymesh 3D. I've now converted this into a poly mesh that I can start sculpting on. So what's the significance of this? Why do we have to convert these 3D meshes here into poly meshes? And that's because when you're working with this 3D mesh, again I'll click on the sphere 3D to load it into my canvas. It has a lot of powerful settings here in the Initialize subpalette. So I'll open up Initialize down here at the bottom of my tool palette. And you can see if I click here on the poly frame that we can adjust all the settings. So I can adjust its size in X, its size in Y, its coverage, and you can see just from that one sphere we can create a variety, almost like endless variety of different objects that we can start working with. Once you've created this object, you can simply click Make Poly Mesh and start sculpting on it. So let's take a look at another more advanced 3D mesh. I'll click on the Gear 3D. This one has a lot of settings in the Initialize pull down. Each one of these 3D objects will have their own initial settings. So you can see here we have coverage, just like the sphere did. We have width, and for the gear we even have some graphs that we can start adjusting. So I'll click the outer profile. I'll simply click on this line here to add more points. I can click on the outer section, the inner profile, and you can make tons of adjustments to these tools. Another very powerful 3D mesh is the Sweep Profile 3D. Looks pretty simple, but there's really a lot of exciting things that we can do with this. Again, this one has a graph that we can work with. So I'll click on the point to adjust it. I can click anywhere to add new points. This 3D tool actually even has thickness available. And now that I'm done with the initial state and its settings, I can again go back up to the top of my tool palette and click Make Poly Mesh. Now you'll notice when I do this, I lose my initial settings. I don't have them available to me anymore. But now I can actually start sculpting on the object. So these 3D objects available to you here inside ZBrush all have this powerful initial state that we can work with and adjust. We can then convert them to a poly mesh, which allows us to then continue further editing through sculpting and deformation methods. If you were to import an OBJ file, you may not know what that is at this stage, but more experienced 3D users will. That OBJ file will not have any of the initial settings. These are unique just to 3D primitives inside ZBrush. But you can sculpt on them right away. You won't need to convert them to a poly mesh.